All right, Jody, welcome. For anybody that's watching or listening to this, I am joined today by Jody Patterson. Jody is a PhD published author. He is an archaeologist. He's actually a flying archaeologist, which is partially what we're going to talk about here. And each year when we do our Canyons of the Southwest trip, Jody is one of our special guests and always gives us a talk that everybody just loves. It really informs what we do down there in the Canyons of the Southwest, where we fly, what we look at, how we even look at the earth beneath us. So thank you for being here, Jody. I'm really pleased to be talking to you tonight.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate being here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, you bet. How did you get into flying archaeology?
That's a good question. It's kind of a convoluted story. I was going to school for my doctorate up in Alaska, and of course up there everybody flies. To get anywhere, you got to fly. So I got hooked on flying when I was up there. It was so cool to be flying over all the backcountry in Alaska to get in and out of our project areas and stuff. And so I had immediately after started flying around in charter flights up there, talked to my wife and said, I want to learn how to fly. And she's like, no, absolutely not. You got to finish your degree. So fast forward a few years, and once I finally did finish my degree, then I was able to start in on my flight lessons and get my private pilots from there. And nice. Just the interest of the two go hand in hand together. And it was logical for me to start looking at archaeology from the air once I had that ability to do it whenever I wanted to.
Yeah, it's fascinating. All of us who are pilots, I think we have our, faces pressed to the glass. We love to look out the window. We love to look out at the earth. It must be a whole different experience for you. It's like, did flying and the ability to fly and look down at the earth change the way you approached archaeology?
It has come to be that way, absolutely. And it's not necessarily just airplanes, but it's whatever that aerial view is, whether that's coming through drones or airplanes. There's a perspective that you get that's just really hard to get from the ground. And in a lot of cases, there are things that you can see from the air that you just can't see on the ground, just because the relief is so low on them. Your eye just can't pick them up until it's at that elevated position. So yeah, it does make a big deal. And I've been using the airplane and have identified patterns that, like, there's an article that I have that's hopefully coming out relatively soon that identifies a certain type of patterning in structures of the Fremont culture and how they're distributed in certain places that, I've been walking around on these sites for 20 years, 25 years since being in Utah. And I never really clicked on the patterning until I was doing projects in the airplane, doing archival photographs of all of these sites, when the patterns just started to jump out at me. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a perspective that is very handy in identifying things that you can't necessarily see from the ground, or you just don't pick up at the ground level.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that the scale of things, like, it changes entirely. I mean, honestly, it feels like I'm surprised there's not more archaeologists that just gravitate here, because it seems pretty obvious, that if you give yourself that bird's eye view, you're going to see a perspective that you couldn't possibly see when you had 2 feet on the ground.
Yeah, and there has been an aerial archaeology is more or less what they call it, that's been around ever since, even before airplanes. They were doing it from balloons and kites and things like that. It's really, really popular, and something that's done a lot in Europe, particularly Western Europe, and also throughout the Middle East and North Africa. lots of aerial archaeology and really cool projects going on there. There was early on in the American Southwest, in the area where I'm at, in the 20s and 30s, where it started to be used more and more regularly, and then it kind of petered out, and it kind of ebbs and flows. People will start using it again sometimes in charter airplanes to do particular things, or now, of course, with drones, that's totally changed the landscape, and all the different sensors that you could put on a drone, they're low cost. You know, there's a lot of neat stuff going on with those, particularly using things like LiDAR and other
So
imaging things.
I didn't know that. So you can, even on like consumer level drones, you can buy attachments, like what you buy actual LiDAR attachments.
Probably not so much for the consumer level drones, but maybe for like the upper end of the prosumers and the commercial drones. So once you get into DJI Matrix level type drones, they're a little bigger, or the Inspire drones will carry a LiDAR.
Wow.
And you know, airplanes have been able to have had LiDAR systems in them for many years, but they're just so big and expensive. And now that you can get a small LiDAR sensor that you can stick on a drone, and you know, you're up and going for 15-20 grand, that's a game changer over, you know, a LiDAR system that would fit in an airplane like a 206 or something like that. That would cost more than my airplane cost alone.
Yeah, right. Now, for anybody that's listening or watching that doesn't know what LiDAR is, it's essentially, if I understand it correctly, like ground penetrating radar. Is that accurate?
It's actually lasers. It's
Laser.
a little sensor that shoots lasers out, and it basically records the time that it takes for the laser to bounce back to that sensor. And what's really fantastic about LiDAR is that even if you have a vegetation canopy, you know, a tree cover in a forest or something like that, enough of those lasers can get through the foliage to hit the ground, that you can then in the computer remove all of the vegetation and just have what they call the bare earth or the bare surface returns from those lasers, and you can see all sorts of things that you would never be able to see even if you were on the ground, once you can get that vegetation out of the way.
So it doesn't actually penetrate the ground, but it allows you to, say, fly over something like the Amazon rainforest and see ruins that are buried under the trees or something.
Yep, absolutely. And there's some really good documentaries online and articles and stuff if people are interested in looking into that. There was a program on the Nova, the PBS series, last year or the year before, about some of the work that LiDAR was doing in the Amazon and some of the cool stuff they were finding down there.
Yeah.
Check that out.
I've heard glimmers of it. It sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, you know, so I know you from the canyons of the Southwest, and one of the coolest experiences in my life was finding one of the ruins that you pointed out to us. So, you know, on Friday evening of our airplane camp trip, you give us a nice talk after dinner where you talk about the history of the area and the native tribes over the years that have lived there and then not lived there and so on. And you tell us where we can find some of these structures, and we go out on Saturday and we find them, just like you said. And there's one that I remember circling. It was like 800 years old, and you're just looking at this little circular structure on the top of a butte in the middle of nowhere, and it's kind of breathtaking. How did you gravitate toward that area? I mean, is that area your specialty, the area of southern Utah where we do that trip?
So I live in Moab. I own an archaeological consulting firm called Montgomery Archaeology, and I moved down here in 2000 to start working for the company. Then my boss is retired, and now I'm running it. But so I'm originally from New Mexico, so not too far away. And yeah, I've just grown up in the Southwest and have spent a lot of time here. And it's a fantastic area. There's so much variety in the natural history, the cultural history, the topography of the region, that it can hold your fascination for a long time, both on the ground and in the air. When you guys come up to do your canyon flying course, of course, the area is known for all of the canyons that we have around here. And there's a lot of place names that kind of I'll mention as we go through this a little bit, and just want to point some of those out. So just, can you guys see my cursor? This is the Canyonlands Field Report. What was that, Jason?
I took our faces out of there so that it's just your, yeah.
So yeah, this is the Canyonlands Airport. And down, kind of having a hard time seeing it. Boom, boom. So this is the airstrip at Monument Valley.
Yep.
Oh wait, no. This is the airstrip at Monument Valley. Sorry, that was Bluff up there.
Okay.
But this is where you guys do your fly-in.
Yep.
And everything. And a lot of your guys is exploring. You go north from there to get into the Canyonlands area, and of course, this area is just made up of lots and lots of open space. There aren't many towns, and the towns that are around are pretty small. But some of the places that we'll be mentioning are places like Navajo Mountain, which is a big laccolithic mountain that's off to the side over here. The Henry Mountains are more laccolithic mountains up north of there. The Bears Ears is, of course, everybody used to hear about that a lot in the news because it was a big national monument that got shrunk and then got big again. Comb Ridge is a nice big ridge that you fly up and down all the time. That's a very prominent landmark. Go ahead, Jason.
What did you mean by it got shrunk?
Through president proclamations, they've been messing with Bears Ears and the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. So they've gone from, millions of acres down to thousands of acres, back up to millions of acres, depending on who the president was at the time and what they wanted to do there. And I don't know if it'll change again, but we've had another change in the White House, so you never know.
Probably.
Yeah. Another small set of mountains that are prominent in the area are the Abajo Mountains up here by Monticello, Utah. The confluence is an area where the Green River and the Colorado River come together. And it's usually a really, really spectacular sight to see because the sediment loads in each river is very different. And you get a mixing of those waters with the different sediments when they come together. And if I get to it, I think I got a couple of photos of that.
It's really beautiful. It's like green and brown, and there's just a dramatic line, right?
Yeah.
You see the two different rivers. It's very cool. That's not salinity. It wouldn't be salinity, I guess. It's sediment levels.
It's sediments, yeah. Different types of sediments coming in. The LaSalle Mountains are up over here just to the south and east of Moab. What's really cool about flying around in this area is if you understand the airspace and if you're going to fly, you're 2,000 feet above the national park and everything. If you can, you'll almost always be able to see on a clear day Navajo Mountain, the Henry Mountains, the Abajos, and the LaSalles, and you will never get lost in this area. So you don't necessarily need to fly around with the map too much because you always kind of, once you know where those mountain ranges are, and where you are relative to them, you pretty much get anywhere you want to pretty fast and pretty easily.
Wow.
So they're always good to know, to have those areas around. So you're just flying around and you're like, oh, I need to go over to Moab. You look at your mountains and you turn north and you know exactly where to go.
Wow. Well, you know exactly where to go. I'm not sure it's that easy for everyone.
I think with a little bit of time and experience, it gets there for everybody because they stick up like sore thumbs.
Right.
But so those are some of the places that I'll mention throughout this. Probably don't need to worry about that one too much. So this is a geological map that's overlaying the FAA map here. And what is really fascinating about this area is it really is Jurassic Park. Most of the rock formations that you find in this area, then you're flying in the canyons, are what are termed the Mesozoic rocks. So everything from the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. There's more recent stuff and there's older stuff, but the vast majority of the rock formations, and there are a lot of them, date to those periods. So one of the really cool things about this area is the amount of dinosaur fossils that are found throughout the area. And not only do we get the dinosaur fossils, but there's a lot of dinosaur trackways too.
Wow, that's crazy. And so when I look out at that, I'm flying over it, and you say this is from the Jurassic era. How old is that? What's Jurassic?
Jurassic is about, I don't know, do I have it on this thing here? About 228 million to 144 million years ago.
And then I'm literally looking at those rocks.
Yeah, you're literally looking at all of those rocks.
Wow.
And the different formations, I mean, you got your Navajo sandstones, which are really, really white. You got Cedar Mesa formations, which are kind of purple. You get all of these different colors, and depending on what time of day you're flying, particularly in the mornings or in the evenings when the sun's at a relatively low angle, some of these colors can just be, jaw-dropping. They're amazing. One of the really cool things is there's a couple of places, one I know of, where it's on the Navajo Nation, not too far away from the town of Bluff, where there's a big exposure of Navajo sandstone that has dinosaur tracks in it. That if it has rained and they're wet or moist, because there's sediments that get trapped in those things, that you can actually see them from airplanes. Wow. If you know what you're looking for. And so being able to see dinosaur tracks from the air is kind of unique.
Unbelievable enough, mind blowing. And do you know what kind of dinosaur it was? Do people?
I don't. I couldn't tell you. You can see, the tracks, and you can see individual toes. They're not the big round ones, so they're not these giant sauropods like
an Apatosaurus
and that. But the theropods with the chicken-like feet.
Yeah,
you can definitely make out that patterning.
Wow.
But you do have to fly low and slow, and you got to have to know exactly where they are, and the conditions got to be just right. But it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's like where time just collapses,
Yeah.
Especially because here I am talking about ruins that we see that you show us that are 800 years old, right? Or you think of the famous Mesa Verde stuff near the Four Corners, and it's like, yeah, it's old, but it's not 140 million years
old, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So there are, just recently, in the San Rafael Swell, and also just north of Moab, there's been a couple of different parks. Both, one of them's not a national park, but a monument, and then there's a new Utah state park called Utah Raptor State Park that highlights some of those fossils that are found down in this area. And there's other places that got fossil beds in them. There's a place called the Burpee Quarry that's over near Hanksville that's got a lot of dinosaur fossils that come out of it. Just totally fascinating that there's so much out here.
Oh yeah. And over all that time, I mean, was this, like, sometimes I've heard, I guess it was an ocean. Was it dry land? Was it always there? Did it like move into position? I mean, that's a lot of time,
Yeah, it is a lot of time, and a lot of different things happen during different periods. There are times when the area was inundated by a shallow sea, and that happened back during the Mesozoic. It actually happened after that again as well. And there's places around where, like, if you go up into this area called the Book Cliffs, which is one of the longest continuous escarpments in the world, that you can see it on this map up here. It's this big green kind of band that's up here. These are the Book Cliffs in the Rhone Plateau.
All right, and what airport is that that's just underneath that? I'm seeing, is that Class Echo airspace there? Yeah. What is that?
Yeah, this is Canyonlands.
Okay, so that's Moab, really. That's
Moab, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This was a shallow sea after the Cretaceous period, after the dinosaurs died out. And in this area, you find all sorts of things like marine shell, like from oysters and clams. And in fact, the Utah State University up in Price, the campus there, USU Eastern, have found a site up in the Book Cliffs that has clams that are like 4 or 5 feet in diameter. They're huge. Wow. It's like crazy. It's like that Venus de Milo coming out of an oyster shell. It's like that big.
That's crazy. And is that just because of increased oxygen levels at those times? Is that why everything grew so gigantic?
I don't know. I'd have to ask a paleontologist. I'm not really sure.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, there's some crazy stuff out there. But you do find, a lot of turtle fossils, crocodilians, shark's teeth. You name it. There's all sorts of really neat stuff through there as well.
Must have been a surprise for somebody to be up there in the dry desert rocks and find clams and shark teeth and
yeah, exactly.
It's like, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but that long geologic history is exposed in so many places. Of course, we're not the Grand Canyon, which you guys do fly over, I think, a few times.
We do, yeah, on Friday. Yep.
Which is fantastic and a really fun flight. We don't have quite the time depth of the Grand Canyon, but we're just a little bit north of there.
Yeah.
And we do get, a long period of geology that gets exposed in these canyons, and it changes depending on where you are geographically in southeastern Utah. So you can see everything from Triassic rocks all the way up through past the dinosaurs into the Tertiary period and everything in between. And just the different colors are kind of what grabs a lot of people.
And what is the color? Is it just different rocks from different time periods?
Different minerals get deposited in those rocks, and as they weather out and are exposed, they create that color. So the reds, got a lot of iron in them. The blues and greens might have something like some copper oxides in them or something along those lines that are giving them that color. So yeah, the geology is quite cool, and see some of that in the photos here in a bit. But I always want to talk about archaeology. I know more about the archaeology than I do about the dinosaurs. So.
Well, that makes sense. You're an archaeologist.
That's right. So this is just a map, and it's quick and dirty, of kind of showing site densities. I mean, how many archaeological sites are there through here? Southeastern Utah probably has one of the densest concentrations of archaeological sites in North America. And a lot of these are attributed to mostly ancestral Puebloan peoples, so Puebloan peoples. But there's, 15,000 years of history here as well. We got everything from what we call Paleo Indians, who are your megafauna hunters, hunting mammoths and giant ground sloths and things like that, all the way up to the Native American indigenous peoples that are here today, like the Nimic-speaking Paiute and the Ute, and the Athabascan-speaking Navajo and Apache, who are still here. We have that whole time range through here.
And so when you talk about the mammoth hunters or the giant sloth hunters, how long ago are we looking there? What's that time period?
You're basically looking at the end of what we call the Pleistocene, the end of the last ice age, where that kind of ends and the early Holocene begins. So you're looking at like about 12,500 years ago to maybe 10,000, 9,000 years ago, somewhere in that range.
I don't want to digress here, but I've heard some archaeologists online talk about a major cataclysm somewhere in that time period. Do you see evidence of that in this area where there was a massive, the Younger Dryas floods, and they talk about giant floods and major turmoil on the earth? Is that something that you see here?
We don't really see that here. A lot of the major floods, probably I think the ones that you're thinking about, were ones from glacial dams breaking on lakes up in Canada that flooded into Washington and Oregon and created the scablands. There was a lot of environmental change that was happening at the end of the last ice age, and there is a debate on like if the megafauna went extinct due to hunting pressures from these Paleo-Indian hunters, whether it was entirely environmental, whether it be, dramatic climate change. There's even been, although it's mostly debunked now, thoughts that there might have been some sort of impact from an asteroid of some sort. Could have easily been disease.
Right.
Lots of different things could have happened. And normally what it ends up being is like a combination of a whole bunch of things and not one general or one explicit factor that caused that. So there probably was a lot of overhunting, and as the climate was changing, a lot of that megafauna's, their habitat was either shifting up in elevation or just disappearing altogether. That's going to automatically limit the number of animals that can reproduce. That's going to limit the number that hunters can take, and hunters are going to still take whatever they could get. It's a combination of things, but there's definitely a lot of change that happened. We do see traces of change in things like temperature and vegetation regimes and things like that in pollen samples, in pack rat middens, and things like that. So interesting note on the Paleo-Indian stuff, since we're talking about it and flying. With climate change happening now and temperatures increasing and warming, a lot of the snow patches in the Western United States are starting to melt up at higher elevations. And there are archaeologists that are monitoring those snow patches, those ice patches, as they melt to see if anything is coming out of them. And they are finding all sorts of materials, both Paleo-Indian all the way up to more recent stuff. And there's one group out of University of Colorado who regularly hires a gentleman by the name of Chris Boyer. I don't know if anybody's familiar with him. He owns Kestrel Aerial Services out of Montana.
Sounds familiar.
He gets his photographs published all the time and all sorts of things, but he goes up and actually does a lot of aerial photography on those snow patches so they can identify where they need to go to find those. So that's kind of a neat little tie-in for some of that.
Yeah, somebody knows them, I'm sure.
So
this is a lot. So we're looking at these densities, and this is basically the same area we were just looking at by Bears Ears and Comb Ridge, is really where I see all that dense purple right on the bottom there.
Yeah. So this is the Canyonlands Regional Airport.
Yep.
And this is the area of Bears Ears and the area around Blanding and Bluff. Just over here, probably under the scale bar, that's Mesa Verdes down there, and then Chaco Canyon would be to the south of that. But this area is just covered with prehistoric sites, and a lot of them, like I said, were these ancestral Puebloans habitation sites. So we got everything from small little pit structure villages all the way up to these large pueblos. And it's these large pueblos that you're normally able to see relatively easy from the air, even though they've collapsed. But just to give you an idea, since we're talking about all of this.
Yep.
So we got our Paleo-Indian period. The Archaic period is kind of what was happening after the end of the Pleistocene and the megafauna disappears, but before farming takes hold. And we still have hunters and gatherers that are roaming across the region. They're just hunting smaller game, and they're focusing also in on plant resources, wild plant resources. Once the domesticated crops start showing up from the south, things like corn and beans, we enter what we call the formative period. And in the southeastern Utah, that's mostly attributed to the ancestral Puebloans. As we go a little bit to the west and to the north of that, we have what we call the Fremont culture, which are kind of, let's say, cousins of the ancestral Puebloans, culturally anyway. They also adopt a lot of the same subsistence strategies, so growing some corn and other domesticates, but also still relying fairly heavily on hunting and gathering, and not congregating in as big of communities, but still starting to congregate more into what we would call a village in some cases. And then, of course, the most recent, what we call the proto-historic, is that time frame just before European explorers started coming in, mostly the Spanish. And by that point in time, the ancestral Puebloans had migrated mostly out of the area down into the Rio Grande Valley and farther south into New Mexico and Arizona, and were replaced by Numic-speaking people such as the Paiute and the Ute. And then we have a wave of Athabascan speakers, mostly the Apache and the Navajo, coming in from the north. That those guys are those groups are still here today. And of course, we have the Navajo Nation. We have some Ute reservations around as well. So,
and where would the is it the Anasazi that built the Mesa Verde cities that we see? Is that did I get that right?
Yeah. Anasazi is synonymous with ancestral Puebloan.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those terms that's kind of changed a little bit. Okay. We used to use Anasazi all the time. It's now ancestral Puebloan is used more often, but it's somewhat politically driven as well. If you are working on the Navajo Nation, they still refer to them as the Anasazi.
You mean the Navajo do?
Yes.
Okay. But those are the folks that were pretty much, you said, migrating to the south and to the east before the modern, say, Navajo, Paiute, and Ute came in.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and of course, one of the big changes in land use in southeastern Utah happened with the introduction of domesticated livestock, whether that be horses, but also sheep, that were both used extensively by local indigenous groups once they became available.
Really? Okay.
And massive quick culture change once those resources were adopted, for sure.
All right.
But yeah, do you want me to go on and just show some of the photos of what area?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be cool to see that now. This is where, this is great. Let's see them.
Yeah, this is Rapley Ridge. It's not too far from where you guys are based when you're doing your fly-in. This is the San Juan River that cuts through it, but the light in this photo doesn't do it justice. But this isn't one of those super colorful ridge lines that exist in Utah, and the way it erodes in these almost triangular shapes is really really neat to see from the air.
Yeah, and that's just sort of flaking off over time.
Yeah, it's basically it's if you put them up on kind of untilt them,
Mm-hmm.
it would be like mesas like you see now, but they've been uplifted and shifted down, so they're eroding out like this. Crazy.
Yeah, it's wild.
And then this is a photo. This is what probably would be called the sister to Monument Valley. This is the Valley of the Gods. It's just a little bit north of Monument Valley, and it's got some of the same types of formations. They're not as grandiose as some of the ones in Monument Valley, but another little fantastic area. And
That's
what's
cool.
really good about this area is if you are flying, you can do some low, slow flight through here with not bugging too many people on the ground, like you might get in trouble at
Monument.
Monument.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's one of the joys of flying around here is that it is so sparsely populated. And when you see a spire like that, where it's just like that thin little stick, was that a robust mountain at one point, and like we're just seeing the remnant that's about to fall over?
Yeah, it's exactly what you're seeing. You're just seeing what's left of something like this ridge that's eroded away, and for whatever reason, these remained. Yeah. So they might have had like a capstone on top.
Mm-hmm.
That was a slightly harder material.
Yeah.
That somehow didn't get eroded away and has just protected that from eroding out from wind and rain erosion, water erosion over time.
Wow.
I don't know what else. Oh, we can go to this photo, I guess. This one's always fun and hard to find. This is Rainbow Bridge. And this is just not too far from Lake Powell within Navajo Mountain. And this is I don't know. Have you seen this one, Jason?
I haven't. But I don't know if you know this. On the way home from our trip just in October, one of our aircraft had a forced landing. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. Everybody did a fantastic job, thank God. And it was, coming out of our survival course, it was a non-event. We had 2 helicopters there inside of 2 hours, and we had them off the mountain inside of 4 hours. And everybody was fine. But when I look at this picture, it reminds me of where they went down. They went down just on the just southwest of Navajo Mountain. And they hit the only flat spot an airplane could hit. I mean, they did such a good job. If they had missed the flat butte that they were on, they would have landed right into what we're looking at here, and that wouldn't have been pretty.
Wow, that's scary.
It was, yeah, no, it was really, we all learned a lot, honestly. We'll have Fernando on a webinar. He was the instructor, and he did an amazing job. And Joe, the pilot, flew it in, and he did a great job too. They were really paying attention all weekend, and thank God with a little bit of luck and a lot of skill, they were fine. But yeah, we all learned a lot from that.
Wow, I'm glad everybody was okay.
Me too. Yeah. And that we don't have to diverge on this too much, but on our trips, Howard does a talk called Spending the Unexpected Night Out, just how to survive one night out. He does another talk called Staying Found, which is like how to actually get found once you are, out on a mesa or a butte or something. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest takeaway. I mean, there's a bunch of big takeaways. I mean, all the lectures, the lecture that Peter does about and Eric, how you have to be wearing your survival vest, came into play. The filing the flight plans, the PLBs, the signal mirrors, all of it came into play. I mean, they used everything that we taught them all weekend, and you just think, even with all that stuff, if what happened to them had happened on Saturday, which is, after we hear you talk, after we hear this talk, we go out on Saturday and we go out looking for this stuff. And we're pretty remote, and it's 2 airplanes this way, 2 airplanes that way. It's not a whole flock of airplanes like it was on the day they went down. And you just realize that even if you do everything right out there, you're out there for 24 hours in all likelihood.
Yeah.
You are stuck out there for 24 hours. And if you don't land perfectly, all the survival equipment that you're going to want better be strapped to your body, And so it's like, it really gave kind of a validity to all the lectures that I've been hearing from my colleagues. It was like, wow, they're serious about that.
Yeah.
So it's really, for me, after more than 20 years of flying, it's changed the way I fly. I wear a survival vest now. When I'm flying remote, I have my gear on me, and you take things a bit more seriously.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's, I talk about flying low and slow, and I like doing that. I'm not in an airplane that's I'm not in a backcountry plane. I'm not in a tail dragger,
right?
Or anything like that. And there are times when I'm flying over the area that when I'm done doing what I'm doing in my photographing, I fly high just so I have that, because things are so far away.
Yep.
And I have that extra glide time just so I can find a place to put down.
Yeah. And plan to be there for 24 hours. And that's the nice thing about Howard's survival talks, is that a lot of survival talks are unrealistic, in the sense that they're going to talk about survival food and what kind of food you need and this, that, and the other. And Howard's just talking about 24 hours. Like, what do you need to successfully survive the night? And it's certainly not food,
Wow. Yeah, and that's some of the most rugged terrain out here, is that area around Navajo Mountain. There's not a lot of access to get in and out of there on the ground. It's pretty remote.
Oh yeah, it looked like the surface of Mars. I mean, it was just boulders, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool, though. I don't think I've ever seen the Rainbow Bridge, though. I'll look for it when we go back next year.
Awesome. Well, this is a picture of the goosenecks on the Colorado River.
Wow.
Not to be confused with Goosenecks State Park, which is on the San Juan River, which has many more of these. But these goosenecks are always pretty neat to see how these rivers end up meandering through some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I know I learned this in like 8th grade science, but I don't remember. So when we see a river do this, are we looking at a river that's going to cut the corner there and leave? Like, will it cut through those rocks and leave the gooseneck as a sort of dried up pond?
Yes, eventually it will, and it's going to hit probably where these narrowest sections are.
Yeah,
will eventually be there. And if you fly around enough out here, you will see these on both the Colorado River. I don't think I've seen any on the Green River. There might be, but also on the San Juan River, there's you can see where these are now just kind of like these islands that are in these canyons, but the river's nowhere near them.
Yeah. Yeah. And is that just like a cycle? Like a river starts out sort of straight and then ends up meandering and then ends up getting straight again and then ultimately meanders? And does it just repeat that way, or does it just work its way towards straight?
It depends. There is basically an evolution of them. It'll try to straighten out. One of the things that's going on with the Colorado Plateau, where this is it's still lifting up. It's still it's still rising. So things like the Grand Canyon, the Colorado north of the Grand Canyon, all of these rivers, they're in these deep canyons because there's this constant action of them down cutting, but also the plateau moving up. So that's why they get so deep so quick.
I see.
Relatively speaking. I mean, there's millions of years. But so
archaeological quick.
So it's a dynamic system still, so it's always changing. But the rivers are always going to try and find the path of least resistance downslope.
Interesting. Wow. Cool.
And of course, there's the confluence. This isn't the best picture of the confluence with the coolest colors of water, but you can kind of see where the green and the Colorado come together, and you can see where those different sediment loads in those rivers are mixing, and they stay distinct for a while, and then as you go downstream, they start to mix and move out. If you have a big flood up on the Colorado, this will get really, really orange, almost bright red. Um, and if you go online and look at, there's a local photographer, landscape photographer, his name's Tom Till. He's retired now, but he has some phenomenal photos, aerial photos just like this one, of the colors in these rivers being even more dramatic and vivid.
Yeah, it's very
Definitely
cool.
worth looking up online.
Yeah, I've seen it. I mean, this is a cool picture, but I've seen it. This doesn't even quite do it justice, like to what it looks like in real life. How's Lake Powell doing these days?
Last winter we had a very good snow year, and the lake levels did rise a little bit. It's still well below where it should be, but it was better. But this year again, our snow levels our moisture levels are lower than they had been, so we could lose any gain that we got last year or this year if we don't get more moisture. So those are the Bear's Ears.
Yeah. Is that Navajo Mountain in the back?
That is Navajo Mountain in the background. See, I told you, you already know all the mountain ranges around.
Right. You know, I could find my way to Monument Valley from here. That's wild. Oh boy.
Oh, this is just a little bit of ways from the Bear's Ears. This is an area that I did a study on using aerial archaeologists. It's called Beef Basin.
Yeah.
Let's see, but we got cool stuff. This, like I tell you guys every year, this is one of my favorite formations in the area. This is called Upheaval Dome, and it's in Canyonlands National Park.
Yep.
And it is an old asteroid impact crater.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and you can see, of course, you know, the big indentation here and the rings coming around it. And there's another ring a little farther out that's not quite as complete. But yeah, this is really cool. I mean, if you're ever flying in northern Arizona and you get to fly over Meteor Crater, that's always fun, and it's really neat. But it's only about half the size of this thing.
Yeah, and that's the one with the tourist center on the edge, and it just looks like a crater on the moon. Yeah, well, I flew over the one you're showing here. I found it last year, and we circled it a bit. And when I look down in the center, am I seeing remnants of the asteroid itself? Is that what the debris in the center is?
No. There's a big in the center. There's like a big cone of almost whitish material, right? And that's probably salt.
Okay.
So there's been debate on this particular feature for many, many years as to whether it's what we would call a collapsed salt dome, which is a upwelling of salt that's under the earth from some of these shallow seas that we talked about earlier, that kind of swells and then collapses and leaves a depression. So a lot of the valleys around here, like Moab Valley, Castle Valley, are collapsed salt domes. We're in these canyons, but they're basically have just the salt below them is washed out and they've collapsed. There's other places around there that they're called salt dapirs, I believe is how it's pronounced, DAPIR, that are these extrusions of salt. But that's what you're seeing here. And so there was considered a long time that this might be a collapsed salt dome, and that's just kind of remaining salt that was pushed up. But they have managed to find evidence of things like what they call tektites, which are small fragments of glass that came out from the eruption, as well as a type of quartz called shocked quartz that happened here. But going back to earlier when I said there's always multiple things that could be happening, or when there's a debate and there's multiple sides, it's usually some sort of intersection between things. So one of the most recent papers I saw about this is that it's actually a little bit of both. A little bit of a collapsed salt dome, but definitely an asteroid impact as well.
Must be an old impact, huh?
It is. It would predate. the large impact that killed off the dinosaurs.
Wow. Okay.
So before that, for sure, and not nearly as big, but there's another image of it from much higher altitude, looking straight down, and you can kind of see this big area here is a salt dome.
Interesting.
Looking thing, or Tapir type thing. You can see these nice concentric ring going around it.
Yeah.
In fact, on this particular one, I actually took a whole bunch of photos with something like a GoPro camera that was strapped to the bottom of the airplane, flying around at 12,000 feet, and made a 3D model of it. That's is really cool and fun to play with. It's online somewhere. I don't remember where I saved it, but.
Wow, that's really, really cool. I can see the next photo you're going to show. That's the structure I believe I saw.
This is probably not the one that you saw. The one that I usually point out to you guys is actually not far from Upheaval Dome.
That's correct.
Along the river, and it's called Fort Bottom Ruin.
Interesting.
But this is something that would be similar to that. This one's not nearly as big. This is one that's out in Beef Basin.
And is that what does anyone know what it was? Was that a home or a temple, or does anyone have any idea?
On this particular one, it's really hard to say. You can't make it out here, but there's other structures down below in these rocks, and it could have been some sort of signaling tower. There is a cultural phenomenon during the ancestral Pueblo of large towers being built, and the exact purpose and function of them remain somewhat unknown. It could be that they were signaling towers, or just lookouts, or some sort of defensive structure, maybe a retreat to go into if you were being, attacked or something like that. So there's multiple ideas that people have, but nobody knows 100% certain.
Did it always have no roof, or was that just like erosion and collapsed over time?
A lot of times we find evidence that these would have had roofs on them, but of course they would have been wood and brush and things like that, and those usually eroded away. Where you find similar structures in more protected areas and overhangs and underhangs, you can still get a lot of those traces of the roof still showing.
Yeah, and it's the other thing that jumps out to me, especially the one that you were talking about, which is near the Upheaval Dome, is like it's up on top of a butte. Like, how did people get up there? Was that? It must have been more accessible at one point.
Yeah, it's the one up near the Fort Bottom Ruin. It's not easy to get to, but you can get to it. In fact, there's a Park Service trail that takes you up to it now. But a lot of times we do find these towers, both in ancestral Pueblo and in Fremont cultures, that are kind of in what we would call a defensive position. They're not necessarily totally inaccessible, but it's not easy to get to them.
Right. You have to want to hurt me to come up there.
Yeah. Yeah. And the location itself is relatively defensible. I mean, you could be up on top of that rock there, keeping anybody from getting up on it.
Sure. Yeah.
For sure.
Huh.
But this is called the Citadel.
Mm-hmm.
It's out in the area of the Bears Ears National Monument, and this is a fairly popular place to go for folks. What's really funny is, so when I took this photograph, I'm 1,000 feet in the air. I'm probably using a 200 or 300 millimeter lens to get into this. But when I post something like this on social media, I get the hate mail from people like, "Why are you flying your drone around there?" I'm like, "Well, I just was flying over this and happened to shoot it while I was flying over."
I believe I hunted for this one last year for, 30, 45 minutes. I was unable to locate it, but that's probably because I wasn't paying enough attention to your lecture.
Well, next year I'll point it out to you more.
All right, that's good. We need like a lat long or something.
Yeah. And this one you would have to be flying on the south side of it to be able to see into it like this, to get to see the structural.
Yeah, maybe that's the problem. Yeah.
Oh, There are some more photos of mountains. I don't know.
Beautiful.
Everybody sees mountains all the time. I don't
That's a
know.
beautiful photo, though.
Yeah, so these are the LaSalles.
Yeah, pretty. It's
One of the
kind
cool things about the LaSalles are they have what they call these rock glaciers,
wow.
where these masses of rock are just flowing down on ice and moisture down. They're like ice glaciers, but they're just covered in rocks. So they're incredible. They're really hard to walk across if you ever get on one.
Why? What is the surface of it like?
Just rock.
Gravel?
Just
Like loose rock or hard? It's not hard rock. It's like loose rocks.
it's loose rock, yeah. And
Wow.
they're relatively big, so you're always wondering if you're going to twist an ankle or.
Oh wow.
But and of course there's other neat things around Moab too. So this is always a popular one. This is the potash evaporation ponds that are just south of the Moab airport.
Beautiful.
And this particular time I caught it with a lot of good color. But they're pumping the potash out from under the ground in solution, and they pump it into these ponds, and they use the different colors of dyes to accelerate the evaporation and get so they then clear out the potash itself, and they ship it off on a train.
Wow, so cool.
Yeah. And just to show how otherworldly this area is.
Wow.
This is always one of my favorite places. This is the Mars Desert Research Station.
Yeah.
Run by the Mars Society, where they do simulations of what it would be like to have a habitation on Mars.
Interesting. And are people in there in the dome? Do they live in there for periods of time?
They are. They I'm not sure how long their missions run for. At least a couple of weeks. They'll send people in here, and they won't be able to leave without putting on their space suits and things like that.
How do you sign up for that? That sounds like fun.
They have on their website. You can do it.
Really?
All sorts of folks. But what's really fun is this is just off the end of the runway at Hanksville. So you take if you land at Hanksville and you take off to the west, it's like 2 or 3 miles from the end of the runway. So you're still flying over this all the time whenever you're taking off from through there. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've seen that over there. That's what are all those red airplanes representing on that sectional chart?
Yeah, I think this was from a few years ago when I was giving a talk. I just pulled up some old presentations. These were actually just a whole bunch of old backcountry strips, or old mining strips. And I think I was just talking about at one of those talks where I keep all of this information in ForeFlight. So when I am flying around, if I do have an engine out situation or something like that, and if I'm high enough, I can at least know where these may not be in great condition anymore,
right?
But there's somewhere that I could put down, hopefully safely.
Sure. It's something. Wow. That's really cool, Jody. Thank you so much for walking us through that. And now I have, unfortunately, I don't get to go fly it tomorrow. I have to wait till October because now I feel like or September this year. But yeah, that's fascinating stuff. It's always interesting to hear you talk about it. And like I said up front, it really brings the terrain to life. So when you fly over it, you just don't look at it the same way.
Yeah.
And I know that's your whole career. So
yeah, I feel really lucky to be able to live here and even luckier to be able to fly around out here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I look forward to seeing you again on our trip in September. We're September 25th through the 28th this year. So the 26th, I think, is the Friday.
Cool. I'll put it on the calendar.
Excellent. I hope you don't have a wedding or something. And I'll do the same without you. And thanks for joining me here on this podcast. I know folks are going to find this fascinating because I do. And thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jason. It was good seeing you again.
Yeah, and hey, before you go, is there anything I can help you promote? I don't know, like your company, your consulting company, or is there anything I can do to help get the word out about some effort you've got going on?
No, if people are not for me personally, but if people are interested and are in the area, there is a program called the Utah Site Storage Program run through the state of Utah, who help the land management agencies go out and monitor a lot of these really cool sites. They're non-renewable and people are out all the time and things get destroyed. They're out there to help preserve these as best they can. So if anybody is in the area and interested in the archaeology of the area, they should definitely reach out to the Utah State Historical Society and find out about that particular program, because it's gotten really big over the past few years and they're doing fantastic things.
Awesome. Well, and there it is. The word is out. So thanks again for being here. It was great chatting with you.
Good chatting with you too, Jason.